A black single father walked into his own hotel just before midnight, wearing a gray hoodie and worn jeans, with his 8-year-old daughter asleep on his shoulder. One small hand was still wrapped around a stuffed bear. He asked for a room. The front desk clerk looked him over once, then leaned forward and said just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." 3 minutes later, that same clerk handed 2 key cards to a well-dressed couple who hadn't even made a reservation. When the father asked to speak with the manager, he was publicly humiliated and escorted toward the exit in front of a lobby full of witnesses who had no idea the man being thrown out owned every inch of the hotel. Before the night was over, someone would be fired on the spot. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere, this one's for you. Stay with us. Marcus Bennett had not planned to stop there that night. 3 months abroad had a way of making a man crave the simplest things: a hot shower, a real bed, and the sound of his daughter breathing steadily beside him. His flight had landed 2 hours behind schedule. By the time they cleared baggage claim, it was nearly midnight. Driving another 40 minutes home in that condition felt reckless. So he made the decision quickly, the way he made most decisions, without ceremony and without announcing them to anyone. He knew exactly where they were going. The Grand Meridian on 5th. It was a flagship property of Bennett Hospitality Group. The hotel Marcus had taken 11 years to build from a single underperforming property in Charlotte into the company it was now. He had opened this location himself. He had cut the ribbon himself, stood on that marble floor, and told his team that this place would represent everything he believed about how people deserved to be treated. He hadn't been back in 4 months, and he hadn't called ahead. That was intentional. Marcus had a habit of visiting his properties unannounced, dressed exactly as he was now. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, plain sneakers, no watch, no luggage announcing wealth. It was the only honest way to see what was actually happening inside his buildings when no one was performing for the boss. His father had spent 22 years working the night security shift at a hotel very much like this one, and something his father had said once never left Marcus. The way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter tells you everything you need to know about it. Not the people it was trying to impress. The people it believed it could afford to ignore. Zoe had fallen asleep somewhere over the Atlantic and had barely woken since. She was 8 years old and weighed almost nothing, but after 3 months apart, Marcus would have carried her twice that distance without complaint. She had her mother's eyelashes, her father's stubbornness, and a worn stuffed bear named Captain tucked beneath her chin. Marcus held her with one arm and pushed through the revolving door with the other. The lobby of the Grand Meridian was exactly as he remembered it. Warm light fell across Italian marble. Soft jazz drifted from somewhere near the bar. A long front desk of dark mahogany was staffed at that hour by a single clerk. The space had been designed to make people feel immediately welcome. Marcus had personally approved every detail. He crossed the floor slowly, mindful of Zoe's weight, and approached the desk. The clerk was a young man in his late 20s, well-groomed and wearing the hotel's Navy uniform with careful precision. His name tag read Derek. He looked up from his screen when Marcus approached. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not rudely, just a quiet recalibration. The way a person's face changes when their eyes deliver information their brain has already processed. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the sleeping child. Then he looked back at his screen. "Good evening," Marcus said. "I need a room for night. 1 night, 2 guests. It doesn't need to be anything special." Derek's eyes stayed on the screen a moment, longer than necessary, before he looked up again. Then he leaned forward slightly, just enough, and said in a voice carefully pitched for the people nearby, "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." The words landed between them with a particular kind of weight, not shouted, not aggressive, just quiet and certain. The kind of statement people make when they want humiliation to feel inevitable rather than personal. A woman at the lounge bar glanced over. Marcus didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Derek. "I'm asking for a room. That's all." Derek straightened. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight. No availability." Marcus didn't react. "Nothing at all? I'm not looking for a suite. A standard room is fine. We just need somewhere to sleep." Derek repeated himself with the smooth, practiced patience of someone who had delivered that line many times. "Fully booked, sir. I apologize for the inconvenience. There are several other hotels in the area that may be able to accommodate you." Marcus stood at the counter in silence for a moment. He looked at Derek's face. not with anger, but with the careful attention of a man cataloging what he was seeing. Then, less than 3 minutes later, the front door opened behind him. A couple walked in. The man wore a blazer. The woman wore a coat that cost more than most people's rent. They moved like people who expected rooms to be available because, in their experience, rooms always were. Derek's entire posture changed. His shoulders lifted. His smile appeared quickly and genuinely. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian," Derek said. "Do you have a reservation with us this evening?" The couple did not. They were walk-ins, exactly as Marcus was. But within 4 minutes, Derek had confirmed a room, processed a card, and handed over 2 key cards with a warmth that filled the entire counter. Marcus watched every second of it. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered without a single word, and both men understood it perfectly, even if only one of them was willing to admit it. Zoe stirred against his shoulder. Her voice came out soft and half-conscious, muffled against his hoodie. "Daddy, are we at the hotel yet?" Marcus tightened his arm around her. "We're here, baby. Just give me a minute." Then he turned back toward the desk. His voice was calm, the way still water is calm, not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because whatever is happening has not yet decided to surface. "I'd like to speak with your manager on duty, please." Derek's expression shifted again, this time into something less smooth, a flicker of concern he covered quickly. He picked up the desk phone and made a short call. Marcus waited. He looked around the lobby at the guests sitting in the lounge chairs, at the concierge desk where a young woman was attending to organize paperwork, while clearly tracking the situation, at the soft light, the marble, and the jazz, still playing somewhere near the bar. He had built this place to feel like a sanctuary. He wondered, not for the first time, what happened to things you built once you handed them to other people to run. The manager arrived within 2 minutes. His name tag read Richard. He was in his mid-40s. The kind of man who wore a suit at midnight because, in his understanding, authority was something you maintained through appearances. He had clearly been briefed before reaching the desk. He didn't come to the situation with an open mind. He came with a conclusion already drawn. "Sir," Richard said, positioning himself beside Derek in a way that made the situation obvious. 2 men on one side, Marcus on the other, Zoe asleep on his shoulder. "I understand there's been some confusion. My staff has already explained that we don't have availability tonight. I'm afraid there's nothing further I can do for you." "There's no confusion," Marcus said. "I watched your staff book a room for a walk-in couple while telling me there was nothing available. I'm asking you to explain that." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "Our staff exercise their professional judgment. I stand behind that." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Your professional judgment?" "That's correct." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He thought about his father. 22 years of night shifts. Uniforms worn thin at the elbows. The way his father used to come home and sit at the kitchen table, without speaking for a while, before he could become himself again. His father had never been angry about it. Not really. Just tired in a particular way Marcus had understood even as a child. What his father had given him wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. And standing in the lobby of his own flagship hotel, holding his sleeping daughter, Marcus felt that clarity settle over him like something solid. He was not going to reveal himself. Not yet. He needed to see how far this went. Not for his own satisfaction, but because if this was happening at the property that was supposed to set the standard for everything else in his portfolio, he needed to understand the full shape of it before he did anything about it. "I'd like your full name and your exact title," Marcus said. For the record, Richard provided both without warmth. Marcus noted them quietly and completely, without making a show of it. Then he stepped away from the desk, found a seat in the lobby, settled Zoe against him, and waited to see what came next. He was not finished there. He was just beginning. He didn't have to wait long. Richard hadn't returned to wherever managers went at midnight. He had stationed himself near the front desk, arms crossed, watching Marcus the way a man watches something he has decided is a problem, but hasn't yet figured out how to remove. Every few minutes, his eyes moved across the lobby to where Marcus sat with Zoe still sleeping against his shoulder. And each time, his expression carried the same message. "You are still here, and I would prefer that you weren't." Marcus noticed. He noticed the way Richard whispered something to Derek that made the younger man straighten his spine. He noticed a young woman at the concierge desk. Her name tag read Maya. She kept her eyes carefully on her desk, while her hands had stopped moving entirely. He noticed two guests at the lounge bar who had grown quiet in the last several minutes, their attention drifting in his direction without fully committing to it. The lobby had developed a particular kind of tension, the kind that forms when people sense something is wrong, but are waiting for someone else to name it first. Marcus had seen this before. Not here, not in his own building, but in enough rooms over the course of his life to recognize it immediately. It was a tension of people who knew something unfair was happening and had decided, each for their own reasons, that it was not their place to say so. He gently adjusted Zoe's weight against his arm and kept watching. Richard eventually made his move. He crossed the lobby with the measured stride of someone performing authority rather than exercising it. He stopped a few feet from Marcus and spoke in a kind of lowered voice designed to sound discreet while still being heard by everyone nearby. "Sir, I've given you some time, and I want to be straightforward with you. This is a private establishment. We've explained that we can't accommodate you tonight, and continuing to occupy the lobby after being informed that is not something we're going to allow." Marcus looked up at him. "I'm sitting in a chair in a hotel lobby. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't caused any disruption, and I haven't done anything that would give you grounds to ask me to leave." "I'm not asking," Richard said. Something in the room shifted. One of the guests at the bar slowly set down his glass. Maya's head lifted slightly, then lowered again. Marcus looked at Richard's face. The certainty there, the complete and undisturbed confidence of a man who had never once considered that he might be wrong. Something settled in Marcus's chest. Not anger. Something older. Something more deliberate. "Then I'd like you to call security," Marcus said. "I want this to be official." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned and gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby, where two security guards had apparently been waiting for exactly that signal. They were both large men, moving with the patient heaviness of people who did this regularly. They positioned themselves on either side of Marcus's chair with the practiced ease of a maneuver they had performed many times before. And at that exact moment, Zoe woke up. Zoe came back to consciousness the way children often do, not gradually, but all at once. She blinked into the light, instantly taking in the lobby, the guards, the tension in her father's body, and Richard's expression. She sat straighter against Marcus's arm, clutching Captain the Bear to her chest. Then she looked at the two large men standing beside her with the frank, unguarded curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend she didn't see what she saw. Then she looked directly at Richard. "Why are you making us leave?" Her voice was clear and unhurried, carrying the particular quality children's voices have in quiet spaces. It traveled farther than she intended. The guests at the bar heard it. The couple near the elevator heard it. Maya heard it. Richard did not answer her. He looked at Marcus instead, which was its own kind of answer. Zoe looked at her father, then back at Richard, working through the situation with the methodical patience of an 8-year-old who took questions seriously. "If they don't want us here," she said, "why do they work here? Isn't their job to help people?" There was no accusation in her voice. She was entirely sincere. It was the kind of question a child asks when the behavior of adults simply doesn't add up. But sincere questions asked clearly in quiet rooms have a way of landing harder than anything rehearsed. The couple near the elevator had both turned now. The guests at the bar were no longer pretending to look elsewhere. Even one of the security guards, the man on Marcus's left, shifted his weight in a way that suggested he was uncomfortable with where he was standing. Maya had gone completely still at the concierge desk, her eyes fixed on the surface in front of her, her hands flat against the counter. Marcus looked down at his daughter. He kept his voice level and warm, the way he always did when he wanted her to understand that the world's disorder was not her fault. "You didn't do anything wrong, Zoe. Not one thing." He held her gaze until she nodded. Then he straightened and looked back at Richard. Richard's face had changed. The certainty was still there, but something beneath it had cracked slightly, not from doubt, but from irritation. Zoe's question had drawn attention he hadn't wanted. It had shifted the dynamic of the room in a way he couldn't immediately control, and his response was to push harder. Some men, when they feel control slipping, tighten their grip. Richard was that kind of man. "This has gone on long enough," he said, his voice dropping all pretense of hospitality. He looked at the guards. "Please escort them out." The guard on the left moved forward. The one on the right followed. Marcus stood slowly, careful with Zoe, keeping her close against his side. He did not resist. He did not raise his voice. But he did not move toward the door either. Not yet. He stood in the center of the lobby with his daughter beside him and looked at Richard with the expression of a man who had seen everything he had come to see and was now deciding what to do with it. Several phones had appeared in the room, not conspicuously. People weren't holding them up or making production of it, but they were there, angled in his direction, recording the specific geography of the moment. A black man in a gray hoodie, his 8-year-old daughter holding a stuffed bear, 2 security guards, and a manager whose face said he had already decided how this would end. Marcus reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. He found the number he was looking for, pressed call, and brought the phone to his ear. The call lasted less than a minute. He said 4 sentences, listened for 10 seconds, and ended the call. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and stood quietly, his hand resting on Zoe's shoulder. "Daddy," Zoe said softly, just for him, "do we have to go?" Marcus looked down at her. "Not tonight," he said. "We're not going anywhere tonight." Richard heard him and took a step forward, his patience fully exhausted. "Sir, I am telling you for the last time." The elevator chimed. It was a small sound, the kind the lobby produced dozens of times a night, without anyone noticing. But every person in that room noticed this one. The doors opened. Thomas Carter stepped out. He was the CEO of Bennett Hospitality Group. Silver-haired and wearing a dark suit, he clearly hadn't had time to fully straighten before coming downstairs. 2 other men from the executive team walked beside him, both moving with the barely contained urgency of people who understood the precise weight of what they were walking into. Thomas crossed the lobby directly toward Marcus. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at Derek. He looked at Marcus the way a man looks at someone he has just realized he has failed. Then he stopped in front of him and said with a formality that carried genuine weight, "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry you were kept waiting." The lobby went silent. Not dramatically, the way rooms do in films, the way rooms do in real life, one sound at a time, until nothing remained but the faint jazz from a bar, which suddenly seemed completely wrong for the occasion. Thomas turned toward the front desk. His voice was even, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "This is Marcus Bennett. He is the founder and sole owner of Bennett Hospitality Group." He looked around the room. "He owns this hotel." He let the words settle. "He owns the chairs you're standing next to, the uniforms you're wearing, and the contracts that determine whether you work here tomorrow." Thomas paused for exactly one breath. "I want everyone in this room to be very clear about what happened here tonight." Derek had gone the color of the marble counter. Richard had not moved. He stood in the center of the lobby with the particular stillness of a man whose understanding of the situation had just been completely restructured, but who had not yet figured out what to do inside this new reality. Zoe looked up at Thomas, then at her father, then back at Thomas. She pulled Captain tighter against her chest and leaned into Marcus's side. "Daddy," she whispered, "you know this man?" For the first time since they had walked through those revolving doors, something in Marcus's face softened completely. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I know this man." Nobody moved. That was what Marcus noticed most in the seconds after Thomas finished speaking. The complete absence of motion in a room that, only minutes earlier, had been building towards something loud and certain. Richard was still standing in the middle of the lobby. Derek had both hands flat on the mahogany counter, as if he needed it to hold him upright. The 2 security guards had stepped back without being told, instinctively creating distance from a situation that had just fundamentally changed shape. Even the guests who had been recording on their phones lowered them slightly, caught between the instinct to document and the sense that what was happening now required something more than a screen between them and it. Marcus looked around the room. He looked at each face in turn, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction of a man who had won something, but with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. He wasn't thinking about what he wanted to say. He was thinking about what this moment actually was and what it required of him. Richard found his voice first. It was either brave or foolish. In this case, probably both. "Mr. Bennett, I want to explain. We had no way of knowing the circumstances." Each sentence began with confidence and ran out of it before reaching the end. He wasn't lying exactly. He genuinely had not known who Marcus was. But Marcus had spent enough time in enough rooms to understand that not knowing was not the same as not being responsible. Richard understood that too, somewhere beneath the scrambling, which was why none of his sentences could find their endings. Marcus let him finish. He didn't interrupt. He didn't change his expression. He didn't give Richard anything to push against or cling to. He simply listened until the words stopped coming. Then he spoke. "You're right," Marcus said. "You didn't know who I was." His voice carried across the lobby without effort. Not because he raised it, but because everything else had gone so quiet. And that's actually the whole point. Richard said nothing. "Everything you did tonight, you did because you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the standard. Not because of anything I said or did. Because of what I looked like when I walked through that door." He glanced briefly toward Zoe. "And you did it in front of my daughter." Richard opened his mouth. Marcus continued. "My father worked security in a hotel like this one for 22 years. He came home every night carrying something that never fully left him, the weight of being dismissed by people who decided, before he even opened his mouth, that he didn't matter." Marcus looked around the lobby. "I built this company because I believed that didn't have to be the way things worked." His voice remained calm. "The person standing at your front desk deserves dignity before they've proven a single thing to you, not after you've checked their clothes or decided they look like they belong." He turned toward Thomas. Thomas gave a short nod. Then Marcus looked back at Richard. "You didn't just fail a customer tonight." Richard's face tightened. "You failed everyone who has ever walked through a door like this one and been made to feel like they didn't belong." Marcus paused. "And you did in front of my daughter." Richard attempted one more sentence. It didn't get far. "Richard," Marcus said quietly, "you're terminated effective immediately." He looked at Thomas, who stepped aside to make the call. Richard's face settled into something gray and inward. Whatever argument he still had left in him, he chose not to use it. He straightened his jacket once. The small automatic gesture of a man trying to preserve the last intact piece of his dignity, then walked toward the back office without another word. Derek was next. Marcus crossed the front desk slowly, giving the younger man time to understand what was coming. Derek looked like he hadn't taken a full breath in several minutes. His jaw was tight. His eyes carried the particular shine of someone working hard to hold himself together. Marcus stopped at the counter and looked at him directly. "You made a choice tonight based on how someone looked." Derek said nothing. "I want you to sit with that, not with what it cost you professionally, but with what it means, what it actually feels like to be on the other side of it." Marcus kept his voice even, not unkind. "I'm not ending your career here, but you're going into a full retraining program, not skill-based, values-based." Derek's eyes lowered. "You're going to spend real time understanding what this work is and who it's for. If you come out the other side and still want to be here, the door is open." Marcus held his gaze. "But tonight cannot happen again. Not to anyone." Derek nodded. It was a small movement, but it was real. Marcus turned and walked toward the concierge desk, where Maya had remained motionless through everything, her hands flat on the counter. Her expression carried the particular tension of someone waiting to find out whether she was in trouble for something she hadn't done. Marcus stopped in front of Maya and kept his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "You saw it," he said. "You knew something was wrong, and you couldn't say anything. I understand why the structure here made that difficult. That's a failure of leadership, not a character." Maya opened her mouth, but Marcus continued before she could apologize. "But I watched you tonight. The way you tracked what was happening. The way something in you recognized where the line was, even when you couldn't cross it. That matters." Maya looked at him carefully. "Starting tomorrow, you're moving into a supervisory role in guest services." Her eyes widened. "Because I need people in positions where they can actually act on what they know is right." Maya stared at him for a moment, her expression moving through surprise, relief, and finally resolve. "I won't let you down," she said. "I know," Marcus replied simply. He turned back toward the room. The guests who remained were watching him openly now. No pretense. No phones held up. Just people waiting to hear what came next. Marcus spoke without preamble, the way he had learned to speak when what needed to be said didn't improve with decoration. "I've been building hotels for a long time, and the only standard I've never been willing to negotiate on is this one." He looked around the lobby. "Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with respect, not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they look like, not based on whether they seem like they belong in a place like this." His voice remained steady. "Every person, every time, without exception." He glanced toward the front desk, the bar, and the marble floor his father had once been allowed to walk across only as an employee. "That is what this company is." Marcus looked around the room one last time. If anyone here cannot commit to that standard, I would genuinely rather you find somewhere else to work. He paused, not as a threat, just as the truth of what we are. The room held his words for a moment. Then Zoe, who had stood beside her father through everything with Captain tucked under her arm and the serious, focused expression of an 8-year-old determined to understand the world correctly, tugged once on his hand. "Daddy," she said, "can we get our room now? I'm really tired." The tension in the room finally found somewhere to go. It wasn't quite laughter, but it was close. Even Thomas pressed his lips together to hide a smile. Marcus looked down at his daughter, at her earnest face, her worn stuffed bear, and her completely uncomplicated sincerity. The weight that had been sitting in his chest all evening finally shifted. It didn't disappear. It simply moved into something that had more room in it. "Yeah, baby," he said, "we're getting our room." 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a family came to the revolving doors of the Grand Meridian. 2 parents, travel-worn and dressed for comfort rather than impressions, walked in with 2 young children trailing behind them. One child dragged an oversized backpack and refused every offer of help with the absolute conviction of someone who had decided this was a matter of principle. Maya was at the front of the house when they entered. She crossed the lobby to meet them before they reached the desk, introduced herself by name, and asked how she could help make their stay easy. She didn't look at their luggage. She didn't look at their shoes. She looked at them, the tired eyes, the stubborn child, and smiled the way people smile when they genuinely mean it. Within 2 minutes, the parents' shoulders had relaxed. Within 5, even the child with a backpack had allowed someone else to carry it. In the far corner of the lobby, Marcus stood with Zoe beside him. He had come for a scheduled visit this time, wearing a jacket instead of hoodie, though Zoe had still brought Captain. They had been there for 10 minutes, and he hadn't announced himself to the staff yet. He wanted to see this first. The ordinary work of the place. The everyday version of what he'd spent his life trying to build. Zoe watched Maya lead the family toward the desk. She watched the children light up when Maya said something that made them laugh. Then she looked up at her father. "Is that what it's supposed to look like?" Marcus watched the family settle in. He watched the tired parents exhale. He watched the child with the backpack finally let it go. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it's supposed to look like." Zoe considered this with the quiet thoughtfulness she brought to most things. Then she nodded once, tucked Captain under her arm, and reached up to take her father's hand. Marcus held it. Together, they stood in the corner of the lobby he had built, watching the place finally become what he had always meant it to be. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before they prove anything, before they show you what they have, before you decide whether they belong. That's not just good business. That's what's right. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stick around.